Okay, guys. This is spoilers for Wind and Truth explicitly. Jason, you just joined us. I don't know how you could sense that we had moved our way into Wind and Truth. If you are in the chat, please go away. There is a reveal that I'm about to reveal that blew my mind, that made me literally, like, you've seen reactor video people. Maybe I've watched too many of those, but I had a reactor video moment in my car as I'm like, oh, what? Felt? Is a ghost blood? Drove me crazy. It's one of those moments where the minute you read it, the minute you see it, it just makes perfect sense. It's like every little crumb that's been there all along, and he was on Scadrial. He was a spy for the nobles. He was hanging out around Kelsier's people. He helped out Elend. And then he just happens to show up on Roshar, hanging out with like the most important family on Roshar for decades, doing nothing. He's there with the Night Watcher when Dalinar goes to meet with the Night Watcher. He just happens to volunteer to go into Scadrial. He just happens to be there when we know that there's a spy and there's a Scadrian right there. And I don't know of anybody who called that. It just...
Yeah, I didn't see anything on that. I actually didn't even realize he was a ghost, not a ghost blood. I didn't realize he was a Worldhopper until like a couple chapters before, when Sanderson spells it out for you, and he's like, I forget whose POV it was, Shallan's, where she's like, oh yeah, he seemed like a foreign or something. Like she was suspecting that he was a Worldhopper. I was like, so Coppermind, and that's when I learned about it all. And then a couple chapters later, I was like, oh, well, he's a ghost blood.
Yeah, that's one of those reveals that will probably come out of nowhere for like a good chunk of the reader base, who will be like, Felt? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess he was with Dalinar at some point, whatever. And then you'll do your reread of the Cosmere, and you'll be reading Elend and Straff talking, and Felt walks in, and you're like, what? Felt? I've been here the whole time.
The one who tells Elend that Vin is Ska.
Yeah, and he found their base and was spying on them.
But I'll be honest, I was a little bit like, okay, I know this name, but I didn't immediately for me. I was just like, okay, I know he's been around, but it did not immediately for me like go, oh, Felt. Like I did have to think for a bit.
Yeah.
It is 4 books represented on screen at once in this first interlude. We have a Scadrian who is awakening and capturing a herald with the assistance of a Seon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, by the way, I'm with Dusty Regalia on this. The evil Seon was, or well, I guess the Ghost Blood Seon we're gonna say, was much more of a shock for me.
Kelsier's not evil, but he has evil Seons. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying this is a rogue Seon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I don't know. This talking about Kelsier being potentially evil, like he straight out calls. He doesn't call him Thaddecar. He calls him Kelsier in the interlude, and so he's on a first name basis with the leader of the Ghost Bloods, and he is very happily considering murdering this herald. And so I don't know, that doesn't do Kelsier any favors in my mind as far as whether or not he's a good person.
Well, he is.
Well, we've known for a while that he was interested in capturing him.
Yeah. He's saying I would not kill him unless it was necessary, right? He's saying maybe there's some benefit still.
He also doesn't. He might not know that because again they don't know that the stabbing them kills them. That's like Kellec's whole thing in book 4. He's like, like, oh, it only took them a couple thousand years to realize we could trap them in gemstones, but then it doesn't work for them. That's so. But what you're saying, like, it's not just that like he's okay with killing him. Felt is like toying with him. It's so sadistic. It's like,
oh yeah,
it's really awful.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like someone who's doing it because like, oh, this is what's best. It's like, oh, I'm having fun here and I'm enjoying seeing this person squirm. felt for Calic a lot in the whole interlude. You could tell something bad was about to happen from the beginning, where like it was so telegraphed. I am pulling it up, but like when you're in Calic's mind and he's just talking about how he'd survived and I should have gone, and but
I'm finally
he
safe.
felt like
I
his
can
time
retire
was.
tomorrow.
And then the next thing, the door comes down and he gets tied up in a curtain.
Five planets. Ashen also. The 4 books, 5 planets, because Ashen's boa constrictors also gets a call out. He's like, it was constricting me like a boa constrictor from the home world. Kalak says that.
No.
Which world is that?
Oh, Ashen.
I don't know Ashen apparently.
Oh, it's the homeworld of the humans.
Where do they come from? Where the humans come.
Okay.
You've got
That's
Roshar,
right.
you've got Ashen, you've got Braze, which is
Yes.
Where all the splinters of Odium hang out at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
The fuse.
That's the world they destroyed.
John S. It should be the same blade that. Well, let me look. Okay. Because that's a good point. We need to know whether this is a Razium suck them up dagger or whether this is an anti-investiture dagger.
Oh, I thought it has to be the suck them up because Kalak wouldn't know about the anti-investiture daggers, really, would he?
Probably not. It does have the gemstone in the pommel, which is important. It's a dim? Wait, where is it? Gosh.
I mean, how would he have known? Like, it was only created in book 4 with Navani and Raboniel. So.
Yeah. Kalak wouldn't know about it. That's fair.
So, Felt was a Windrunner. Is that right? Or was he just in the guard?
He was just in the guard, like the house guard for Kholin.
He wasn't a squire or anything. Okay.
No. It's just listed as a dagger with a gemstone. So it's unclear whether it is an anti-investiture dagger or just a suck them up and seal them away dagger. Kalak wouldn't know the difference between the two, though, right? Like they look, I think, fundamentally the same. He would probably have noticed void light or anti-stormlight in the dagger.
That's right.
So I would assume it's a seal away dagger, not a thing. Sandalorian Felt does have breath. Yeah, he's awakening. So we're talking like full world hopping at this point, where the Ghostbloods are getting as much investiture as they can get from all the different planets. Yeah. It's not literally the one that killed Yezrian. It's the kind of one that killed Yezrian.
Wonder how many blades have been made at this point.
Right? 9, 10, perhaps. Probably.
10. 5 for both sides.
Yeah. So many great questions.
It was weird. It was the going back to the evil Spren thing, evil Sion thing for a second. It was kind of weird because the last time we've seen Sions, they're always so like altruistic, I guess. So this one was like being sarcastic and
that was weird.
It was so like off-putting. I was like, what is happening?
Well, and not just sarcastic, but he was like, all the Sions we've seen have been like, oh, it's my pleasure to serve you, and like I just am here to serve, and this Sion specifically was like, oh, if I have to listen to this couple make up one more time, and you're like, okay, yeah, apparently that was grating for you.
To be fair, I mean, Shalom could get a bit. Even Kaladin says like, all right, you know. But yeah, no, it was pretty. That for me was like, oh my god, you know, especially because you think about like what that Sion, what he must have heard from Shalon and Adolin that's now being passed to.
Oh yeah, so much.
Yeah, all of their conversations.
Prison, Terrifying.
And it was connected to Wit at some point. So we have all that information.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wit and Pattern.
Yeah, the spying game for the Ghostbloods, they've just won it completely. If this war is an information war, we are not doing well. The Ghostbloods are doing significantly better.
Yeah, bag of pudding. I'm with you. Wit is. I mean, he's and usually Wit is like he's like not touchable, but he's been he's slipping a little, I guess.
First the Sleepless, now the Scion. Were the Sleepless? What is that a reference to?
Oh,
I know who they are, but like
his pen. Remember, he finds out one of his pens was Sleepless.
He being
Wit. Hoyd.
Oh, I don't remember
Yasna. that. There's a scene where he's like freaking out, and Yasna's like, "What is wrong?" And he tells her, "One of my pens was not actually a pen."
Was that from Wind and Truth?
No, it's in
Rhythm of War.
Oh, I gotta reread Rhythm of War.
It's actually one of my little headcanons right now that the reason some of the epigraphs are the letters between like Hoyd and Frost and things and the shards is because that's a transcript that the Sleepless made from Wit's writing desk. So like those aren't just the letters between Hoyd and Frost, but those are like records that have been gathered by the Sleepless after having spied on Wit for however long that they have. It's a headcanon thing. Brandon's not said anything about that yet. Sandalorian said, Felt, would he have to be Nalthian to have breath? And no. So breath is one of those things. Yeah, breath is one of those things you just have to be able to receive it from someone, not be born there. Most of the magic systems don't require birth on a planet. Scadrial is kind of your big genetic requirement, and then Cell is your birthplace, seems to be tied to Elantrian, but not necessarily like forging and the other magic systems.
I mean, even Scadrial, if you can get your hands on the metal, right? Because Wit is Mistborn. Right. So then theoretically you could become Mistborn. I guess Hemorrhagy you could, potentially get.
Well, Wax is a Mistborn now too, right?
Yes, because of breathing in the powdered Lerasium.
Lerasium.
It is still unclear how Wit's done it. He has a bead of Lerasium from Secret History, we know that. What he has done with it, there's a point in one of the letters where he says, I keep it close to me as my own skin. And that has always rung to me as hemalurgy. Like, if you're keeping something with you and it's as close as your own skin, piercing your skin. So I wouldn't be shocked if he like has a hot swap where, okay, now I can be, I want to be an Allomancer of this kind or something like that.
Interesting.
We've seen him use Allomancy, so you can gain it.
The assumption was that he used the bead of Lerasium, but you think he might be saving it for something else?
I think that if Hoyd has the option to consume something as powerful as a bead of Lerasium or to use it for a long period of time, he'll pick the one that lets him use it for the longest period of time.
Well, wouldn't consuming it let him use it for a long period of time?
It would,
because he'd be a Mistborn?
Maybe. It's one of those weird things where like he is already such a strange individual, he might not want his spirit web permanently changed. And also, that only affects him. Whereas if he's got a little set of hemalurgic spikes made out of Lerasium, he can make anybody a Mistborn if he wants to, or an Allomancer of some kind. So I could see him wanting the tool to stick around, because he could always swallow it later if he wanted.
How would it work as a hemalurgic? I thought that hemalurgy has to be through blood.
What do you mean?
There has to, meaning that like, well, I'm sorry, wait, hold on. I think I just blacked out for a second. You're saying that like he has the bead of Lerasium, but he hasn't swallowed it, and he's just sort of inserted it into his skin as like a spike?
No,
I'm saying
she's
one
saying
of the possibilities. I'm saying it's one of the possibilities, yes.
But wouldn't that not work? That would be like, that's more ferochemy.
Oh, I think he would have had to he would have had to engage in some way with it. So somebody else would have had to spike somebody, or there's a lot of
Are
options.
you saying that he would have the bead of Lerasium, he's keeping it safe for another time, but he also got these spikes from other locations, and he's using those and swapping them out? That's how I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, more or less.
But wouldn't that open him up to... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it could. I mean, that's why I don't think he keeps it in all the time. But it's just one of the
theories.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the interesting complexities about that theory would be, if he did have spikes, why would he be writing letters to Sazed?
Right, I was just gonna say that. I was like, that would get any connection to Sazed. I also don't think he would open himself up to potentially being able to be controlled by another being.
Yeah.
Interesting,
I think
though.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say Brandon has been asked as to whether Hoyd's using the Lerasium as a metal mind, and that person got a Rapho card. So I think we've got at least the option. He's doing something with it. We know he's got Allomancy, but he wouldn't need the whole bead, right? He doesn't need to be a super powerful Allomancer like Elend. He could use a little bit of it and become a medium powered Mistborn, like Wax did.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I will. Do we have any information that Wax took a medium amount, and so his Mistborn powers are medium? I haven't seen anything about how powerful of a Mistborn Wax Cilium is.
So I think the argument is
just because he took a powder version, it wouldn't be as strong.
Well, it's less of it, right? So instead of a huge bead of it, it's like little small pieces.
I wonder if quantity matters and affects how powerful the Mistborn it is, or if it's just you get any at all, you're a powerful Mistborn now.
Yeah, well, it is. Let's see. We're running through words of Brandon here on it.
No worries.
The amount of the metal, to me, has always been the key to why you have the early Mistborn super powered, and then your later Mistborn, after it's diffused through the genetics, less powerful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
What about, let's see, from this first one, how do we, I liked that Kalak considers Kelsier a herald. Thought that was amusing and a kind of a very like Cosmere Avengers kind of moment where you're starting to use these terms across the planets.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me sort of like how all the birds on Roshar are chickens. He's sort of that's how he can like can visualize Kelsier. He's a herald. I also thought it was really interesting, sort of like okay, the Ishar thing. What was that? He says something about Ishar.
Yeah.
This is a big thing. He says something about how Ishar is like holding them all together. Which is why like some of them are more. I don't remember. I have to see. Hold on. Do you have it up, CJ?
I do. Where do they have it hidden?
Trying to find it. It was in the first interlude.
Yeah.
Without Ishar holding some of it back, it would have destroyed him long ago.
Right. To me, that really stood out because we know that Ishar is going to be a big part of this book. And so does that indicate that like Ishar is doing something, and so that's what's making him crazier? And that's kind of what's allowing Ash and Kalak to at least function? Or like, what? I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
I ever since I read that line, I have been rethinking the agony of 9 become mine, death rattle. Because I've always read that as, or the burden of 9 have become mine. And I've always assumed that was Taln, who is bearing the burden in Braze of 9 heralds. But if Ishar is bearing the burden of 9 heralds' insanity, that would also be the burden of 9 become mine. And I think would be far more interesting. And also, I don't think Taln recognizes the burden he was bearing. like in some ways, he would not be able to tell you, oh yeah, this is harder. It's like, no, this is just as miserable as it's always been. I think that's really interesting, and I want to know more about what Ishar is doing and how he is doing it, and whether it's actually as helpful as he says it is. Also, because, you know, they've said all along, Ishar's the most sane, Ishar's the most sane, and then he's also like the God King of Tukar. And it's like, are you the most sane, Mr. Almighty Herald person?
Well, that's why I thought it was so interesting at the end of Rhythm of War, because Ash keeps saying, oh, you know, if any of us are sane, it's going to be Ishar. And they're always thinking this. And then you see Ishar and you're like, he is certainly not sane. Because that's about as far from sane as you can get. So it's like, is it that they haven't seen him in a long time and he has, from whatever he's doing, you know, is that kind of what's turned to, I don't know. It's so, that to me like really stood out, especially since we know that Ishar is going to be really important.
Yes.
What specifically do you think he was holding back? Like because it seems like he's talking about the wear and tear of living a long life specifically before that sentence comes along. So is he like kind of pulling back similar to like what Hoy does with breath, where he's able to like compartmentalize and just hold on to specific memories, and Ishar is able to help with that in some way? Or do you think it's something more to do with like the torment?
I read it as sort of like, I actually thought it was really interesting because it's the first time we really get an insight into how, like, what kind of madness or how the heralds are feeling emotionally. And the way that he describes it as like panic, indecision, and a crushing darkness, which sounds a lot like a panic attack or something like that. And so, you know, I don't know. I don't really have an answer for you, Gary, but
Sure.
I think I found it really interesting. I was like, this is really our first insight, because obviously Talon is not really, he's not there. So it's hard, you know, we don't really get his like emotional state necessarily. Ash is the one who I feel like right now she's like the most sane, and she just comes across as being like super angry and like snapping. But this was really interesting to kind of see like if for thousands of years living on, if you were having a panic attack for thousands of years, like what would that do to your mental state?
That'd be crazy.
Yeah. Even like him saying like his life seemed like a blur, a wash of gray and brown, a fresh painting left out in the storm. It's like, it's so sad. I feel like it's, you know, it's just, yeah.
He's unable to remember. I love that. Like just before that, when he says, he tried to remember the man he had once been, the hero who had fought for thousands of years. Oh, it's so sad.
Yeah, I know. And it's so interesting because, you know, I think like, I don't know if you guys have ever thought this about like, you know, immortality or whatever. And I've always thought like, that sounds horrific. You would never want, you know, just the amount of information that you would have to deal with, let alone like seeing all the people that you know, passing or whatever would be. But like this kind of, I was like, oh yeah, like these are people who've been alive for thousands of years and they're just not sane anymore. But just the idea of living on the edge of a panic attack for thousands of years just sounds really horrible.
Yeah.
Well, there's that one scene in one of Shallan's first chapters where they're talking to Kalak and he just like runs away. Like he has a panic attack and he runs away from them, and she's like, yeah, you know, you just have to accept that when you're talking with Kalak, he's gonna run away every now and then. He'll come back eventually. Like, that's terrible. That is a horrifying existence. Oh, and that's with someone like taking some of your madness. Oh.
And also, if he had just gone with them, he would be safe in Urithiru, and he would live out his life, you know, with his friends. And no, of course not.
But also, if he had gone with them, the Scion would continue to spy on the military, and like you imagine, like they're heading back. I'm trying to remember what has. I don't want to get into future chapters. Yeah, basically, like if there were events that were important in the future, he'd continue to report them back to the Ghostbloods, which could be a problem.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like from Kalak's own, just his, feeling sorry for the poor guy.
Yes, he would. It would have turned out much better for him as an individual if he'd gone with them.
I will say, the last couple of bits. Only a fool assumes they know everything. Kalak might yet have a part to play, and then Kalak's response. It seemed that one way or another, further decisions were out of his hands. I don't believe that for a moment. Like, 100%, Kalak's gonna come back to do something because of this, and
he's gonna
this
have a
is
character
Brandon
arc
foreshadowing that will, like, he's gonna do something by the end, and I'm looking forward
by
to
the
seeing
end of
what it is.
I think in this book, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, we know from Wind and Truth epigraphs that the heralds have disappeared by the end of this book.
That's true.
So, I had the thought today that epigraphs could have been written by Sleepless. I think the biggest problem there continues to be I knew the wind as a child, which is the tricky part. But
yeah,
that was a new theory I thought about today. Interlude number 2.
Yeah, I think I'm ready for it.
The Divided God.
This chapter.
That was a good one.
It's a good one. It surprised me because I was like, wow, we're really, this was the same thing that surprised me about the Kaladin Wit chapter, which was, it feels like we're wading really into like some deep philosophical and almost like religious ideas, because this was a lot about like free will and stuff. And I was just surprised. I don't know what you guys thought. It was great, but
it reminded me a lot of his Wax's conversation with Sazed Harmony, when Wax is like, why did you put me through this? And he's like, well, where do I stop? How much of the bad do I stop? It was like the exact same conversation almost that Odium was having with
Cultivation. Yeah, but it goes even further, I think. I think this one goes even further, because this one they really kind of get, because sort of Sazed stops the conversation there, and he's like, well, that's just, I can't save everybody. But this one, like, Cultivation and Odium, like, really have, well, why not? Like, and they go into like, well, what would happen if we did X, Y, and Z? They kind of do a little bit more. Yeah.
Sazed has kind of that trump card of like, hey man, I am holding back the worst from you. Like, chill. I really appreciated Cultivation's response, because I do think there's some levels at which it's like, hey, like this is like an elementary like a fundamental theological dispute or whatever. But I like that she was like, yeah, it's elementary in the way that like gravity is like, there are some things that are just at the bedrock of concepts, and I think trying to figure out godhood is, it's crazy.
Well, I like that they kind of go back and forth a little bit, where he's like, well, what if I created a world where there were, where it was just everything was good? And she's like, well, what do you think would happen? He's like, yeah, that's not a good idea either. Like, they do kind of go back and forth with it, which is really nice. It made me sympathetic towards Odium for like a half a second, and then he goes right back to being evil. But like for a second, I'm like, you do kind of sympathize. You're like, oh yeah, this is Taravangian. But my biggest problem with his world philosophy is that she kind of says to him, well, you have the opportunity to stop all this suffering, end the war. And he's like, no, because then they're just going to fight another war later. And it's like, aha, there's the problem.
Yeah. But it's like, no, they wouldn't. Like, if we could just pause the war, like we could find, you've got the people on Roshar that could find peace. Now, maybe the Fused would not, who are ancient and angry and like ready to take back their planet, but
But he controls them. He has control over them, and he knows down on it.
Some of them.
Well,
it gets weird there.
I do think it's interesting that like she raised up Taravangian, right, because she thought Odium was getting too violent. And Taravangian is a very different vessel. He is a little more nuanced, as Hoyd has even pointed out that like he's not acting the same. Like the other Odium would never have messed with his memories. So he's like, wait, what's going on here? However, the intent of the shard is still driving it because Odium's whole thing has always been to kill all of the other shards, right? And I don't know if we know the nuance behind why Ray specifically was supportive of that, or if he was just at that point more of a conduit for Odium. But at this point, Taravangian, at the end of this conversation, he talks about how not until there is one God. And so it would seem that he is right back on the path that Odium was having, where he wants to destroy all the other shards.
Yeah, I mean, Cultivation even says that. She's like, don't go down that road. And I'm like, Cultivation, this was a bad plan to begin with. But I thought that was really interesting too, is that he's like, no, that's not your name. Like you can see him like already starting to war with the intent of the shard. And for whatever reason, like Odium is just really, really strong and it's just not working.
Can I read that line? Because that was one of my laugh out loud moments from this. So many children died here, unseen, and Odium. That was not my name. I cannot lose myself in godhood. Odium wept for them. It's like, no, poor Taravangian. Like, that's not my name. Okay, it is my name. Like, it's so interesting that he doesn't get Taravangian back until the very end of the interlude, where he's trying to reassert himself.
And it's interesting that he still has the dichotomy of like the two Taravangians, like he's super emotional, but then he can also be the like critical it's so interesting.
I wonder if his curse still applies. I feel like it doesn't.
100%.
You think that he still got the mood swings?
Well, I think he's got
it's not limited from day to day. Like you think it's.
I think that's what it means, the divided God. I mean, it even says Odium was a person divided, one side thinking, the other feeling. So, I mean, that's pretty explicit, I think.
Yeah, but that sounds like it's happening simultaneously at the same time, versus this 20-hour period, he is smart and not empathetic. In this 20-hour period, he's like, it seems like, yes, he's still feeling the pros of both of those times, where he's very empathetic and he's very smart, but it feels like it's at the same time, and he's just kind of warring and having these conversations with himself versus the way the curse.
Yeah,
like it feels set up different.
It's different. My read on it is that he can't think both highly emotional and intellectual.
I think we don't really know how omnipotent the shards are. Like, they're clearly not outside the boundaries of time entirely, but there's a possibility that because he's no longer human, that he's not functioning in the same way. That maybe it's not all linear. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it was such a fascinating chapter.
It was. Yeah, I agree.
What did you guys? Okay, I'm rereading some parts of it, because Odium's talking to Cultivation. So many gods who are cowards, and she says, because we gave people choice, and he says, because you killed your father, and now worry the same will happen to you. So, do you think? I had this debate with some people online in a group chat, and they like, does father refer? Like just Adonolzium is just the father of all the other shards and it's symbolic? Or do you think cultivation, like specifically her dad at one point was Aldonasium and had cultivation as one of his children? And so he was literal when he said, your father.
I think he's referring to Adonalsium. Do you mean like she was literally the child of Adonalsium, or Is that what you're asking?
Sure. Like if God had a kid kind of a situation. Like was not all the shards, but like was she specifically, and maybe some of the other shards like were the children of God.
I think it's meant to be a bit more like metaphorical, like he's saying, like the person who became before you. I think.
Yeah. I've heard that. So, here's how my reading on it prevents that. So it says it's worse in the greater Cosmere. So many gods who are cowards. Mm-hmm. That's odium. Because we give people choice. Because you killed your father. So the you there is unfortunately. I bet that there are translations in better languages than English that don't say you, but that specify it's a plural you. Like, because it was we are cowards because you killed your father. I think he's saying the original, Sandalorian points out, the original vessels killed Adonalsium, the father god. So yeah, I read it very much as metaphorical, not an individual father, but the Adonalsium being the father of the shards, functionally.
But it is interesting that he used the word father versus so many other terms that he could have used. Because why would you not just say because you killed your god? Like, why would you choose the term father? It does, like, even in the context, it's like, because he moves on to say like the warlords here. I don't feel like warlords are someone that you would refer to as father either. So it is interesting that is the word he chose to go with. I do tend to agree with both of you guys and think that it's more of a metaphorical sense and not a literal father, but I wonder if there's more behind that specific word choice.
Yeah. Actually, I was just going to say what Bag of Pudding beat me to it. Like predecessor, I think sometimes it can be used interchangeably. The word father, predecessor, kind of the person who came before you. I mean, the truth is we don't know enough about Adonalsium to actually we don't know because he wasn't human. So like we don't know enough about him to say could he have had children.
We
don't know that he wasn't human.
I was about to say we know so little about him that we don't even know that he wasn't human.
Yeah,
which is the best part. Sandalorian has a good point here. It is also fair to say that everything is the child of Adonalsium, for at least from our current view of the Cosmere. So everything in some way, shape, or form, like all of the vessels, other than Scadrial, all right? Scadrial was created by the shards, whatever. They're the grandchildren of Adonalsium. But as of the shattering, everyone could have looked to Adonalsium and called them father as well, from a you created all of us perspective. So
I mean, in general, like I would say most religions would use the word God and Father interchangeably. So that, like, especially if like Adonalsium was sort of the god of the Cosmere, then it would make, it doesn't necessarily mean literal, So.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I am interested to remember this moment as we, in future books, learn more about Adonalsium to see if it plays a part. If we learn more and it was a hint foreshadowing something down the road. But like I said, I do tend to agree with you guys. I don't think it's literal, but I think it could mean something.
Yeah.
Could be an Easter egg or foreshadowing.
Wandering Tosmoran has brought up one of my favorite little like arguments within the Cosmere is the whole Aether's claim that they predate Adonalsium thing. I know at some point we'll learn more about that, but it's just it's funny that we have Aethers running around going, oh yeah, we existed before Adonalsium, and
maybe they created him. Who knows?
Yeah.
What do you think of this part when he says, I destroyed my predecessor, leave me unfinished with your lessons, and then she says that she walks away from him and he says that he knows that she's going to work against him, had already been planning to do so. So did she, that's a really interesting thing for me is because I've always said, okay, cultivation, this was a bad plan, but maybe she intentionally chose him knowing that he would be easy to manipulate or that she could, I don't know, that, to me, that stood out also.
Yeah, I think her number one concern was Reyes is becoming unstable to the point where chaos cannot be controlled. And Reyes, I think, was becoming too chaotic for her. And so she wanted somebody in control of Odium that had her influence, right? Has her boon and curse upon him, intellect and passion, and, then go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it even says this had been her only choice to prevent a much greater cataclysm. So it's not necessarily even that, like, her plan was, oh, I'm now going to have Odium on a leash and be able to manipulate him and he's going to do what I want, like my lapdog. It's more of this was a last ditch effort because Reyes was going to go nuts. And basically, no one is ideal because the shard's so powerful and its intent is so powerful, but it would be better to have somebody, and I can pick which somebody that will be.
But you'd think, like, it wouldn't be, like, you'd think that Taravangi would be the worst person then, because, Reyes was so unstable, he made big mistakes. And he probably, like, would have been easier for them to beat. Taravangi is really smart, and he's harder to manipulate, which we've already seen. He's been way more damaging than Reyes ever was. So again, bad plan, cultivation.
I like to think of it like, I don't know, as a parent, I'm thinking of like my kids, and in one scenario they could be like just out of control, wild or whatever, and you can try to sit down and talk to them and reason with them, and it just does no good because they're just full of their emotions. And in another situation, they're more calm and collected and will talk about things with you. And I think maybe when they're talking about Odium becoming too violent, too willing to destroy everything, and the emotions rage freely, this was her only choice to prevent a much greater cataclysm. Was like Odium with Reyes was just on that tantrum side where like there was no talking, no reasoning, no, like, you can't stop him. He's just such a crazy force. Or at least with Taravangium, you can try to manipulate and reason a little bit.
Yeah, except that she doesn't. That's the thing, is that, like, she walks away from him, so she's not going to even try to reason with him. She's just going to, because, I mean, even so, like, we've seen he's taken, some of Hoyd's breaths, which was shocking. He was, and even Hoyd says, like, he figures out that it's not Reyes because he's not that intelligent. And so, it just seems like, we've out of the frying pan into the fire a little bit with Taravangian being at the hilt. Like, a really evil, the question is, do you want, like, a really, intelligent evil guy, or a really not intelligent evil guy? And sometimes, somebody who's really smart and evil is worse than somebody who is, I don't know. Yeah. I guess that's the argument.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think, like, cultivation, her whole method is you take the plant, right, and you prune it back, and it might look like destruction because you're pulling things apart, but in the long run, it facilitates growth or helps avoid a negative that we may not, like, someone who isn't informed may not understand or foresee, like, there's a problem here and we need to trim it in order to avoid this problem. And so it could become one of those things where cultivation sees a problem and this is ultimately going to help avoid it, and then it remains to be revealed by Brandon. But who knows, maybe it could just be a big oopsie on the part of the dragon goddess.
I mean, that's the thing. She, like, walks away from him, and he says, "Oh, she's planned all along to, So I don't know. It's now we're just going in circles, I think. But
I was also really intrigued by the line about how he can see her fingers in the conflict on Roshar. I mean, certainly you've got Dalinar being able to unite the High Princes because of her pruning there. But I was curious. So, where's the wording here? Because it's when she says you could just stop the war, and he says no, it would just start back up again. Yeah. You could do it now. Calm the Everstorm, make peace between the nations, restore trade, and in so doing, set them up for another war in a few years. Learn your own lessons, cultivation. These people will not get along because they have different forces manipulating them. Honor's touch lingers, and your own meddling, invisible to most, creates so much tension and strife. So I'm wondering, what is cultivation's meddling that is invisible to most, but creates tension and strife?
I mean, could he be talking about, like, the Dalinar and Lift and his own? I mean, her, like, the biggest meddling she's done that we know about is her giving Taravangian the gift and her planning to have him take over in Shard.
Sure. That's actually really funny. Yeah, that's a good point. The Dalinar Lift stuff, definitely. I mean, it could be just influencing the boons and curses that the Night Watcher's given out over the years, right? Like, just in little,
I was thinking that too,
small places.
Because she's only ever actually, that we know of, spoken and affected two people, which is Lift and Dalinar.
And Taravangian.
Right? Who's the third?
Taravangian.
Oh, Taravangian.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so, just those three.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest would all be through the Night Watcher, which, I don't know. Do we have any major characters? I don't think so.
No, we've got little different groups of people that, there's interludes with one of Ash's guards had been to the night, or was thinking about going to the Night Watcher. That's about it. It's hard to say.
It's so interesting to see, like, his arrogance. I don't know, is this like a Taravangian thing, or is this an Odium thing? That he's been a shard for all of, like, 5 seconds. And he's like, you people should have, like, he's like, I know better than all of you. And it's like, is that an Odium thing, or is that a Taravangian thing?
It's a Taravangian on a smart day thing. Because he was ready to kill the children singing in the streets, right? And so, yeah, I definitely think that's one of those, the balance of, like, the more intelligent you are, the less empathy you tend to have.
Yeah, by the way, this is another thing that stood out to me. I'm like, since when has Taravangian been, I mean, I guess, like, on his emotional days, like, he feels, but does he feel sympathy? Because here he's, like, crying over the death of a child. And I'm like, dude, you've killed hundreds of children. Like, when did you all of a sudden become this, like, I feel everyone's pain? I
think he felt that even before, because he would weep over what he had to do. And in his conversations with Dalinar, he would weep about, like, the burden of leadership and of royalty. And they would talk about, like, their philosophies of, like, would you kill one man to save 10? Or if there were 3 men who you knew one of them did the crime, would you let them all go? Or would you try to pick one and risk maybe being wrong and letting the guilty one go free? And Taravangian's like, I would execute all 3, and he's like, and it would crush me and it would destroy me to do so, but justice needs to be served.
But doesn't that go against what he's saying here? What he's saying here is we need to eliminate all free will so that we eliminate suffering, which is, I don't know, I have to think this out for a second.
I gotta find that part again. Where was that? And
he ends up deciding that would be not the right call.
Yeah,
I was hearing a lot of really interesting echoes of Scadrial. I think Brandon was wanting us to remember the Basin and how they fall behind technologically because Sazed removes all of the conflicts and difficulties. I think that's one of the, like, things that have been attempted in the past. I think Taldane also potentially comes to mind as a place that was isolated and some of those difficulties were removed. And so you have stagnation.
Well, he says that. He says no society can persist with complete freedom, and growth can happen within limits, so I can make it so that free will exist to an acceptable degree while also preventing famines. And that's when she's like, okay, go for it. And he's like, no.
Yeah.
So that it's a weird thing here. That's what I'm saying, is that like you're almost on his side for a second, and then you're like, no, you're still like,
I mean, it is a terrifying concept to be able to feel the pain of everyone in the Cosmere. The pain and the anger and the suffering of every being in the Cosmere that's terrifying. Like, that's awful.
Yeah. I guess that's what cultivation is trying to. She's like, well, let me teach you how to deal with that. And his response, he's just acting like a child. He's like, no, I've been around for 5 minutes and I already know better than all of you. And she's like, okay, that if you want to go down that road, like that's what killed the last guy.
Well, and I think rereading this, I think to your point, like one of the reasons why she probably thought Taravangian was a better vessel than Reyes was because she had cursed him with the empathy, right? Because now you have a god here who actually cares about the people. Still willing to sacrifice people to get the end goal and the end result, but at this point, like, ultimately he still wants to destroy all the other gods, but he's more charitable towards the people underneath him.
To a point, because he's not willing to stop the war. So he's, again, it goes back to this thing where he's like, I care so much as long as it's done my way. Like, it's not, as altruistic as I think he thinks it is.
Yeah.
Because, he's just sort of, everything is a spin-off. Like, he's saying, like, well, I do care so much. And she's like, okay, then end the war. And he's like, no, because then they're just going to start more wars. My solution is kill all the other gods until I'm the only one there, and then everybody will be happy. That's kind of a leap, but is the same thing. It seems like that's the odium thing. That's the intent that they can't get out of, whoever has the mantle. It doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
So then it's like, is it more dangerous for him to be an empathetic person with that intent, or is it more dangerous for him to be a non-empathetic person? I guess that's what Cultivation's gamble was, but it doesn't really seem to be paying off.
Yeah. I do think the nuance of that you'll probably see in the lives of the individuals in the territories under Odium. Maybe not because, like you see in this situation, like the boy still is dying that Odium is holding. But ultimately, like, I think he'll try to foster good experiences for the individuals that are beneath him, but still move forward with the big things like the war and move forward his ultimate plan to try to get rid of all the other gods. It's a fascinating chapter, really, for like the scope of the Cosmere. Like, yeah, I don't know if we've ever had like a conversation like this between two shards that wasn't like in a big climactic Sanderlanche, like just having this in a quiet moment.
I don't think we've ever had
really
a conversation between two shards.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Have we not between preservation and yeah,
they've always been. It's always been like one is like preservation and ruin almost talk, but then preservation dies.
Vin and ruin, preservation and ruin.
I mean, sure. If you want to call Vin a shard, I guess that's.
I mean, she was a new shard, just like Odium was a new shard, right?
Yeah,
that's
fair. That's fair.
Hers was literally 5 minutes.
Wait, when does she sit and have a conversation with Ruin when she's already a shard?
When they don't sit, but they are fighting and battling, and Ruin is talking to her about Preservation's plan, and they're it's while they're actively battling for the survival of Scadrial while Ruin's trying to destroy it.
You know,
But they
going
have a
back
conversation.
I was thinking it's actually really similar to a conversation that Dalinar has with the Stormfather, except that it goes the other way. Like Dalinar says to the Stormfather, you have the ability to stop the suffering. Don't let these people in the storm die. And the Stormfather's like, no, you know, this is my nature. I must do this thing. I can't protect everybody. But then he does change and he saves Kaladin. So it's a weird, like, it seems, I'm just thinking this like right now, but it's sort of a very similar, obviously the Stormfather doesn't have nearly as much power as someone like Odium or Cultivation would have, but it's almost the same like philosophical debate. And it seems like Dalinar wins that one with the Stormfather, where he does counteract nature to save Kaladin.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. And that just reminds me of how much we don't know about the Stormfather still.
It also might be a little bit of like the benefit of bringing mortals into godhood is like the more that mortals are involved, it's like, oh, well, the mortal has free will, and so they can change things in a way that like the shard cannot. But you know, the other thing that does get a little bit lost in this conversation is, I mean, they could stop disease. Like we could stop like people, like children dying. Like you could stop some of the more awful things that are happening, and that wouldn't change free will. But that's not really what this conversation that they're having is about. And so it's
well, it kind of is. I mean, because they're talking about like famine and stuff, so it kind of is. Where does he say? Hold on, let me just go back to. Because he definitely mentions famine, which would be the same thing, meaning it's not like, you know... Hold on.
Yeah, you could make this famine go away, but you'd just come back a week later and find them dead for some other reason, right?
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying is that that's what I'm saying is that, like, I was surprised to see it getting into, like, such a theological discussion. Which seems to be pretty common in this book, which does surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, it has to. Once you start having characters ascending to godhood, theology becomes character development, right? Like, what do you do now that you have the power of God? All right, Taravangian.
But also,
that was the thing.
The main character,
the thing I was thinking about Taravangian is like he always talked a big game of like, oh yeah, I'm here to save Roshar, etc., but he had no power. And now he has the power. It's like, okay, what are you going to do, bud? You have the power. What's your plan?
Right. I mean, also, like, to be, like, very fair, though, like, they are gods, but they don't have full, like, we don't know where their limitations are. Because, you know, for example, like, we were saying, well, they could just get rid of disease. Could they? I don't know. Like... we don't really know what their limitations are, and they have some limitations, like they're not fully omnipotent.
Yeah, it does seem that they talk about that. So that was the other thing I wanted to talk about. He says I could stop them, and then Cultivation says, could you? And then let me find it. Fully your... Yeah. This is a curse. I should be able to help them save them. You are forbidden from taking direct action against any who are not fully given to you. So, there is that... Uh-oh. Can y'all hear me? Gary, I can hear you.
While you're looking that up, I'm just with Sandalorian. I mean, not like... Unless you're talking about sort of the Greek god idea where they each had like their... I mean, yeah, I don't know. How else would you define godhood?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I mean, omniscience meaning truly all-knowing. Like, they don't literally know everything, but they're capable of knowing a lot of things. And I mean, compared to me, they would be omniscient. Like if I was,
right. Yeah. This is why Yasna doesn't believe in them as gods, right? This is her whole argument. Is she says they're just very, very powerful spren. So somebody who a god who is fully omniscient, that would be. That's what she would consider to be a god. She doesn't believe that exists. So that's why she, considers herself an atheist. But, which, yeah, I would agree with. I don't, if you, so I guess that, yeah.
Yeah. What I was looking up was, it's when they're talking and the child, he's holding the dying child. I should be able to save them, help them. I should be able to save them. Cultivation says, you're forbidden from taking direct action against any who are not fully given to you. He says, because of the pact my predecessor made, I can break it. If you did, we could kill you, basically. I mean, she doesn't say if you did, we could kill you, but she basically says if you did, I would kill you. Or someone else would. And so, yeah, there does seem to be... There are limits in some ways about how they, but if a person like Moash gives himself to Odium, now Odium could like heal him, do whatever.
Right.
But if the planet hasn't and it's split up between honor and cultivation, then maybe he can't. Which then his theory is, if I'm the only god, then everyone is mine, and then I can do whatever I want with them and do all these things.
Right. I mean, CJ, like to go back to what you were saying before about like, oh, well, they could just stop disease. They do mention that because he says he could see all permutations of time as well as attempts by other shards to do this by directly intervening on such a granular level. He risked creating a society where no one learned and where civilization did not progress. So I can see how that, like, if you were to, let's say, like, get rid of all disease. So I guess what he's saying is that, like, then you would, they wouldn't progress scientifically. I don't know. So I think that's
let's see, what
sort of
should we hit
where
first?
that is. It's not like, again, because he's not really getting into real world theology. It sort of is limited to how much he wants to get into it. But yeah.
That's the concept of like, if you like if you put your arm in a sling and don't use it, then it grows weak, right? But if you work it out, it'll get stronger. Same thing if you put society in a sling where everything's easy and given to them, it'll grow weaker and not actually thrive, where you need challenges to push yourself to grow.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I would say that is sort of the limitations of their omniscience, quote unquote. I feel like we're just overusing that word now, but like the argument of why do bad things happen to good people, which is that's what he's skirting right there. Is we're not going there. So because that's like that's naturally where this is going to lead. If so that's kind of, it messes with this a little bit, but that's fine. We don't have to, because they're not fully omniscient. So.
Yeah, they're not fully omniscient or omnipresent or omnipotent, right? Like they don't have the omnis. They just have infinite power and knowledge and presence, which is different than all, right? It's an interesting distinction I hadn't thought about before.
Also, just to answer, because Shayndlart says, if Adonalsium was omniscient, why did he die? Yeah, I mean, like in my mind, like my own, like, yeah, that would mean that he's not fully omniscient. That if you believe in in God, then obviously there'd have to be something above even Adonalsium, or you could say like within the Cosmere that he is still alive. It's just that he's been broken up. I guess would be the two ways you could look at it.
Or he wanted it, right? There's the Iriali. One of the ways to interpret the Iriali religion is that the one divided himself up into existence to experience it, and that Adonalsium is the one.
Right. So I guess the argument, like the theological argument would be that you can't. This is sort of like the argument: can God create a stone that he can't lift? So it's all of that, which is like theoretically no. It's not that he can't, but that's not how God, for not to get into a whole discussion here, but it's sort of a similar idea.
Yes. I mean, I've really enjoyed the rebuttal to that, to basically say, like, omnipotence is the capacity to do things, and like a rock that an omnipotent person couldn't move isn't a thing, in the same way that a two-sided triangle isn't a thing, right? Can God create a two-sided triangle? No, because it wouldn't be a triangle at that point. Like that isn't a thing anymore, and so it's it gets tricky.
Right.
Cosmere Junkie.
Really interesting.
Yeah, so. It is. It's one of the things that's always been intriguing about the shards, and having mortals ascending into that godhood role, because it's like, all right, mortal, you have the chance now, do it. And it's like, well, okay. And then Sazed, messes up and gets 300 years behind the rest of the Cosmere because they don't progress the way they should have. Cosmere Jess pointed out the Scadrians not inventing things the way that they should have. Totally agree. They should probably have like space travel and things by that point, but they don't.
At least the radio.
Right? Radio and moving pictures and all that. If we're talking about 300 years from like French Revolutionary technology, yeah, on a planet where you've got abundant access to resources, but that don't make it too easy. Why not?
Is it French Revolution era, or is it even earlier than that? To me, it felt earlier than that.
Yeah,
it felt more like not Middle Ages, but like shortly after.
Well, it's tricky. Lord Ruler had canning techniques, right? And he had suppressed the gunpowder multiple times. Like there's references to how he'd find people who were making guns and basically take away their technology and hide it.
But part of that was because he was elevated for a short time. He gained some of the information to be able to develop those things himself, right?
Maybe the canning, yeah, perhaps. I guess tricky. Who knows?
I don't feel like it's progressed. To go from like Mistborn Era 1, where they have absolutely no technology at all, to going to Mistborn Era 3, where they have a lot of technology. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. Like how. By the way, because this is another thing we always bring up, CJ, is like Avatar is the same thing. You know how like the difference between between like Last Airbender versus Korra and the extreme growth that they have. I love this stuff. It's so interesting. Yeah,
it's amazing actually, wow, that's funny, because that almost is the opposite argument, because they get 70 years of peace, and it's their 70 years of peace that allows technology to explode forward. It's kind of the opposite thesis from what Sazed claims, and Brandon functionally.
I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's necessarily the peace that does it. It's the freedom of ideas, right? Like if you think about, there were time periods in history where it was very peaceful because there was one guy at the top who was controlling all of the information, versus like the way that humanity progressed was like, the printing press was invented, the Renaissance, and all of these like ideas suddenly being available to the masses. So it seems like that's more an indicator rather than like just peace itself.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Going
it's
back
like
a
the
little
conflict
bit,
isn't necessarily.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
T Squared asked us, what are your Windrunner fifth ideal theories? I shared my video that I made this last week about how I think Lirin taught the ideals, including the fifth one to Kaladin. But I wanted to see if y'all had anything you wanted to share on that question.
I think we do this every live stream. This comes up. What did I say last time? I liked what I said last time. I can't remember. I think it was, there are some people who you can't save, or something along those lines.
You said something like some people aren't. Is it worthy of saving? Is that how you framed it?
I don't think it was worthy, but it was something along. I think it was like the not every, meaning I was using it in a little bit more of a metaphorical sense, which is I think where you disagreed with me. Where I was using saved in the. I was thinking of in like Moash terms. So like if Kaladin, he's desperate to redeem Moash, and then he can't do it just because Moash is too far gone. There are some people that you could just try as much as you can. You're not going to be able to bring them back from the brink, which is pretty dark, but...
Yeah, I was going to say.
I did really appreciate...
I think it's true, but I think that's like an incredibly dark peak ideal. Like we're ending on a bang, and it's like, oh yeah, you can't. Some people aren't worth saving, or something like that. Like that would be
I'm
just
not gonna
nuts.
say it quite like I'm not saying it quite like that. I'm just saying that like it's up to them, meaning that Callan can't do anything to save
Some
them.
people have to save themselves, or
It's
something like that.
somewhere around there. Yeah, that it's like you can do everything that you can, but at the end of the day, they have the he can't force Moash to be a good person again.
Mm-hmm.
I do really appreciate going back to chapter 12, the Moash thought. He painfully felt the lack of Teft, Maps, Dunny, Rock. Not Moash. He no longer missed Moash. His hatred had eased. He'd accepted there would always be those he couldn't protect, but he had not given up his right to take Moash to task. I love it. Love it.
Which I think is a very, I mean, again, sort of in the Cosmere fandom, we've become used to anything that is directly written in the text, we assume is the opposite. But I do actually think this is foreshadowing to he's going to be the one to kill Moash, or that Moash is going to, I really think that this is foreshadowing to no redemption arc.
Yeah,
but we shall
I think
see.
it's fair. It's very fair. Gary, I don't want to. Do you know what my basic fifth ideal theory is?
No, I don't. Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
I love to hash it out. I've hashed it out, I think, once a week now for for a while.
I know you said it was something based off Lyran, which I was sitting here racking my brains trying to think, what did Lyran teach Kaladin here? And,
okay. So you should absolutely. I have a video that just walked through all this, but Lyran taught Kaladin every ideal. That's the basis to the theory. I think potentially he struggles with the foundation, which is why I don't think he ever attracted a Spren. I think in some ways he gets caught up about destination and anyway. So, but if we skip past life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination, Lyran teaches you gotta heal those and save those who can't save themselves. So we go to Hearthstone, right? Like we've centered ourselves in Hearthstone because they are the people who cannot take care of themselves. They need a surgeon. He teaches Kaladin from a young age. You go and take care of people who can't take care of themselves. Then you have and this was huge in Way of Kings. Kaladin remembers Lyran's words about needing to care about life because the Light Eyes won't, before he intentionally breathes in Stormlight for the first time. So like Sanderson literally connects the idea that it's what Lyran taught Kaladin that prepared him to be able to swear these ideals. Then in Rashon's case, we will protect and save even those we hate. So he has the moment where Lyran has the knife, could kill Rashon, could just cut that artery right there.
Yeah.
And he says, no, we have to be better than them. We have to save. Same concept. Lyran then is teaching you have to save even those you hate, so long as it's right. Then fourth ideal, the flashbacks are the girl that falls out of the window and Kaladin can't save her, and Rashon's son. And in both of those, Lyran is saying, hey, look, a surgeon has got to learn there are times when you cannot save people. You have to accept that you can't save this person, go save this person. So Lyran taught the first four, boom, 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 easy to see there. Then that leaves us wondering, okay, then what is the fifth ideal? Could Lyran not teach it? Which is, I think out loud, he could never verbalize it. But I do believe that he taught it, and it's in the first flashback, because primacy is super important from a writing perspective. It's a little girl who comes in, one of her fingers has been crushed. And as Lyran and Kaladin start talking about it, the conversation goes, okay, what are we going to have to do about this finger? And Kaladin says, we got to cut the finger off. If we don't cut the finger off, it's just going to fester. It's going to hurt the rest of the hand. It could cause greater injury. So they are learning you have to sacrifice a part of this little girl to save her. And in that same conversation later, Lyran says, no, son, you can never protect by killing. Lyran, you just killed that little girl's finger, right? Like from a not literal perspective, you have shown us that sometimes you do have to sacrifice a piece of a person, of a thing, something of value in order to save the whole.
Which
so
Kaladin was using as justification to kill Elhokar in that book.
Right, and so then, yes, if we go back to Kaladin's struggle points, he can't sacrifice Moash. He cannot say, "Hey, Dalinar, Moash is dangerous. We need to remove him, like put him somewhere else, keep him as far away from the king." It would have hurt his relationship with Moash, but it would have been the right thing to do. He couldn't sacrifice the singers to save Elhokar. So I think that the fifth ideal is going to require the Windrunners to reach that level of leadership to say, yes, I have seen, and this is the other thing, Kaladin has watched Rashon sacrifice Tien for his own benefit. He has watched Amaram sacrifice his men for his own benefit. He's watched Sadeas sacrifice the Bridgemen for his own benefit. None of those were to save or to protect. They were all for their own gain. And so what I see from the story of the little girl is sometimes a good leader, a good Windrunner, will not just accept that he can't save everything, but will have to make the decision to sacrifice the finger to save the hand, to save the girl, metaphorically speaking.
Which could go right along with what Shay was saying about Moash, and Moash being the crushed finger. He's
sort of. this is where
cut that finger off.
This is where we deviate. Like, I totally am on board 100% with everything CJ is saying until we get to Kaladin's going to sacrifice somebody in order to, it just, to me, I'm like, I don't know if I can square that. Like, I just don't know. I mean, this is sort of like the Captain America Iron Man thing in Civil War. I don't know how to really square that with Kaladin. But if it was Moash that he has to sacrifice, then you're right. It would really coincide very nicely with the two of our theories. But if it's like, oh, he has to sacrifice some nameless, faceless soldiers, eek, I don't know how I feel about that.
I think the thing is that the finger is damaged and crushed, and Moash is a damaged and crushed part of the Bridge 4, right? And so it should have been cut off when there were early signs that the damage was setting in, right? When Moash was trying to kill Elhokar in Words of Radiance, but he's let it sit and fester, and it's gotten worse, and now there's gangrene and like all sorts of infection. And so now it's like, hey, this just needs to be cut out, even though it already is separated from like he's not with Bridge 4 anymore. He's on the other side, but I think the analogy and metaphor still works. I really like that theory a lot.
So Gary, you could be the emulsifier of our two theories.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
I'll say I agree with both of you because it would never be Kaladin just saying, "Oh, here's some innocent person, we're going to kill him," right? Because that just doesn't make sense. It would have to be broken, crushed. It's causing harm to the rest of the body or the unit in some way. So yeah,
I can get on board with that.
Yay! Look at us! Look at us! It's funny. It did take this conversation for me to hear how close the "some things cannot be saved" is to sacrifice. Like it's just like that little extra step of like, okay, well, if they can't be saved, what do
they
we
need
do?
to be sacrificed.
I think Gary, what you clarified is that that it has to be something that's like rotting, meaning that's something that's causing damage. So I think where last week when we were talking about it, we were talking about it in more of like a soldier army thing, where we're saying that like, well, yeah, sometimes, generals have to make decisions where they know, soldiers are going to die. And I think that and that's where I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that. But when you're saying it's like, it's not that, it's that there's something that's actively destroying you from the inside, and that's what you have to sacrifice. So
it's Elend killing Bilg, right? To bring it full circle, when Bilg was sowing discontent in the army and punching his superior officers and saying all the people who had been taken by the mists were causing bad luck. he's causing all these problems, and they had to get rid of him. So yeah, I like both your theories, and I think they're both right. So
yay!
I hope they're right.
John S says, "What if it's Ishar in a moment of lucidity, or the
Ooh.
heralds? Like, what if it's a bunch of the herald? Like the heralds represent that broken finger that is in some way causing the Oath Pact to remain in a problematic state, or something like that. I could see that.
Aren't we supposed to get Kalanel as a viewpoint in Era 2?
He is one of the flashback characters.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I guess the only reason why I would think not necessarily Ishar is because all of the ideals that Kaladin has sworn have been very, very personal, and it just seems like Moash makes more sense for that, but could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the thing that Kaladin's got to cut off is the heralds, because they're all broken in their minds, and so he gives them peace with the dagger and lets them enter the eternities because they are done with being immortal.
For a series that's all about like people with mental health and how to help them, I don't think that's the best way to go.
That's true.
Like the best way to deal with people who have mental health issues is just to kill them. I mean, I don't think
not mental. Well, there's mental health, but also there's mental health of like mortals, and there's the stress that comes along with immortality and already living thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Those stressors aren't quite something
I do see the concern. It does have a little potato tomato vibe.
Okay, I'll take it.
I'm not saying you're wrong, because I do think there's just the reality that the heralds are struggling, and there is a certain piece. I mean, you see it in this chapter. Kalak is like, man, it'd be great to just not exist anymore and not have to worry about messing stuff up.
Well, he doesn't quite say that. He says not to have to make decisions anymore, but he still very much wants to be alive, because if he didn't, there's a lot of ways to get out of that, I guess. But
yeah,
I think he was even surprised. He's like, yeah, even after all this time, he still wanted to live.
Right.
Yeah. Oh man.
All fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Predictions, thoughts, hopes, Shayndl, as we.
Because I'm the only one who's not read forward.
I'm only on chapter 19. I have not read all the way through yet, so.
Which still means that what's going to happen tomorrow, so doesn't count.
And I'll say right now, there are things I'm very excited for you specifically to read that I want to talk to you about. Because I won't say which theory, but there are conversations we've had that I'm like, well, now we have more information on it. So.
Okay. Well, last time we really talked about like how this is still rising action, and I do think Thing is asking, is the next drop more interludes? You guys can spoil this for me. I don't care.
New chapters. It is new chapters.
That's what I thought.
2 interludes.
My prediction, I haven't gotten that far. I think there will be interludes instead of just like after each book. I think it'll be at each day.
After each day.
There's 10 days, so in between each day there will be interludes.
So I have no idea where we're going from this. I still think we're going to get some more rising action. I don't think we're up to the point of the book where we can start seeing major plot. Although I do think we're going to see maybe a chapter of like Kaladin and Szeth on the road. Maybe we'll get like a Dalinar Adolin reunion scene. I think it's still going to be moving the chess pieces into the proper position. So I don't know. In terms of like what we're going to see next, I have no idea. It seems to me like every chapter is a new adventure. Sometimes I'm on board with the adventure, and sometimes I'm like, I want to just forget about that. But
what chapter are you talking about?
Goodness.
I wonder.
Shayndl, I'm sorry, I know this keeps coming up, but I was just having a conversation, and now I'm even more concerned. So my daughter does gymnastics, and we do it during the middle of the day, which means we are also there with like super conservative Christian homeschool people. And one of their daughters is also reading Sanderson, is like super excited for Wind and Truth. and they were like, yeah, my dad has to read it before I do, so I hope there isn't anything too crazy in it. And I was thinking of something that happens in one of the future chapters, but now I'm remembering, will he how are they going to react to that? Will they just understand that their daughter will like read past it? I don't know.
We're feeding it grass.
Right, right.
Stop, please stop.
I'm sorry. So.
I think it depends. How old are we talking? This girl, like 13, 14, or like
not quite 13, 14, like upper elementary.
It's gonna go over her head if
That's what I'm hoping.
If they're that like if she's that sheltered, she's not gonna.
I know that, but I don't trust that family to know. It's one of those things where it's like
that's their own decision. Personally, myself, I don't know if I would want my kids to be reading Stormlight at that young of an age. Just even forget any of that. Just because I think it would be too scary. Like I think it would just be too intense. I mean, unless you have I was pretty precocious reader, but I think still in general, like there's a lot of violence. I mean, just I don't know.
Did you ever read the Animorphs?
Rams a knife into a guy's eye. Like that's pretty violent. What?
Did you ever read the Animorphs series?
No, I didn't.
Oh my goodness. It is literally alien warfare with 5 teenagers that is like, it is a Vietnam War allegory.
Oof.
But it's like it's marketed as YA. So like you're reading this from like upper to lower, like middle elementary up until middle school. And oh my gosh, like it gets dark. It's like 54 books.
Even like the one that's really popular right now amongst the middle schoolers is the Keeper of the Lost Cities. And I mean, they go into stuff with like infertility. They go into some really like interesting stuff there. So I'm not saying like, I mean, everyone has to make their own decision for their own kids or whatever. But I think just in general, even besides for all that, I think that Stormlight Archive for most kids that age is going to be too hard to read just in general.
Yeah.
But I think... it's really interesting because, like, okay, so I teach at a very religious school, right? So let's say with this series, the Keeper of the Lost Cities, so they talk about, like, fertilized eggs. And I always want to say to my students, do you have any idea what they're talking about there? Like, I think it just goes over their head. I don't think that they really know. And I teach, like, 11-year-olds. So we're talking about, I don't think that they understand anything. I mean, there's some really, in that series in particular, there's a scene towards the end where that is like I was shocked to see in a middle grade book, and again I think it just goes over their head. I don't think they really think about the world that way. For kids that are grown up in that environment, they don't really think about it that way. I don't know what the parents are going to say, but
and I like that you said most kids, because I think honestly for me, when I look at myself and my siblings at like what we would read and probably what we were able to read, I think we hit what we probably should have been reading at different ages, if that makes sense. Like
boys and girls are different.
Boys and girls are different, and even difference among those ages, right? Just some kids mature and are more mentally mature and able to deal and handle deeper concepts than other kids are. And at least for me, when my kids grow up, like I'm not so much going to be worried about like I'm going to wait till my kids are 13 before they can read Stormlight Archive. It'll be once they start, I can have conversations with them and talk to them and realize, I think they're ready to appreciate this series. That's when I'll probably say, hey,
it is.
You will read this now.
It is peak parenting to be able to be like, hey man, are you acting like a Moash or a Kaladin right now? What decision are we making? What are we doing?
Yeah.
I think CJ was talking more about like the Chul chapter, like in terms of the parents are worried about like appropriate things, not so much like when we're talking about like philosophical disagreements.
But for you, it was scary or not, right? Like that's the point that you brought up, and it's like
I think that goes into like. I know for myself, I would have been. I know, like I was a super sensitive kid. I would never have been able to deal with like the Adel and killing Sadeas in such a gruesome way. Would have been like nightmares for days. So I think that I think is like it depends on the kid. I think that like when you're talking about like parents censoring things for kids, that's obviously a different thing. But so I guess it's up to them. I think in general, like if my kid was reading Stormlight Archive. I think that I would just like I think that I would be like, okay, this is just going to go over their head. I don't think that they would.
No, when I first read, I think it was when I first read. Wait, what went over your head?
I said I wish it had gone over my head. I don't want that in my head.
Yeah. When I was reading Eldest, I forget how old I was, but I think I was in middle school. And
Yeah.
uh, I remember my parents had read the book before me, and that whole scene where like there was some nudity and other things, like my parents just took a Sharpie and crossed all those scenes out. And so I just read, my God, I wonder what happened
Well,
there, and just kept reading, you know.
we used to do in
That's
school.
funny.
They would do that. They would like black things out in school. We all sat there at the light trying to see like what it was like, what it was saying in there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. The same thing for me. Like when that's the thing. Even in Aragon, like I see some of my kids walking around with it, and I'm like, do your parents know what's in there? Like, I don't know. Like we're talking. The school that I teach at is like a very like is there's different levels of people and what they accept. But there are some kids there that I'm like, there is no way your parents are okay with that. But all right.
It's amazing. Bag of Pudding says, my parents had zero interest in what I was reading as a kid, so I just got all the trauma.
Oh. So that was the best thing when I was growing up. Like my grandfather's favorite TV show is Vampire Diaries. So I come from like a long line of nerds, and like my mother always would read my mother's super into Stormlight Archive and the Cosmere, and she always read all these books with us. Like it was amazing,
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. On that note, we will look forward to next week for Stormlight Sundays. Thank you all so much. It's been so much fun.
It's been awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me join.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yes, we get some new opinions. So I don't feel like sometimes I feel like I get a little. My nature is to be very like devil's advocate, argumentative, and so it's nice to have a buffer. So
Yeah, no, I like to do the same thing, and you might have even noticed that with some of our conversations. Like, if someone is pro Kelsier, I'll go against him, and if someone's very against him, I'll be like, but also look at all this
That's awesome.
evidence.
I had a teacher. Okay, very very quickly. I had a teacher once who said to me, she was like, Shayndl, if I said the sky was blue, you would argue that it was green just to argue, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. So.
It's amazing.
That's what you want in a teacher, I'm just kidding. Cool.
Alrighty.
All right. See y'all next week.
Yeah, enjoy those chapters tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Looking forward.
Right, bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Why? Yeah, Bag of Pudding. We got started a little bit earlier and also had much shorter chapters this week. Oh, goodness. I currently can't click on anything, so we're still going to be live for a hot minute. What is happening? Huh. Well, I can't seem to leave. Hey, it has been somewhat relevant, I think, mostly. I'm trying to leave. I can't seem to at the moment. How's my volume tonight, Thing and Bag of Pudding, if y'all are still here? All right, there we go.